This week on the Unabated podcast, baseball season is here, and we sit down with Jessica Brand to talk about some of the angles you might be missing when it comes to betting on baseball. It's a great show. Let's get to it.
If the guy goes unabated, that's the new word, unabated. That's too big a word. That's like mayonnaise. I'm assuming that's the biggest word I know.
Hello, everybody, and welcome on into the Unabated podcast. I'm Thomas Viola, and joining me, as always, Mr. Unabated himself, Captain Jack Andrews. Jack, MLB season is here. We are getting ready for opening day. We had our Soul series. No sport has a weirder opening day than baseball here, where, we're kind of open, we're kind of not. But there's been a lot of news in baseball and beyond. We're going to be talking with the wonderful Jessica Brands about baseball, and it's going to be a great interview. I'm excited to get to it, but we do have some news to talk about in the sports betting world. This has not been the best week between the Jonte Porter story, of course, what's going on with Shohei Ohtani. We're not here to speculate, but it's not a good look for the sports gambling industry.
Yeah, my reaction to it, both stories, is come on, don't ruin it for us. Like, come on, like seriously. They're two different stories, right? Obviously, we don't know the true story of the Shohei Ohtani situation. And the Jonte Porter is largely speculation at this point, but it doesn't look good. And in both cases, just the perception that there could be something untoward happening in sports related to sports betting is just not going to play well. It's, look, we both know that legalized sports betting actually leads to these things being uncovered in a faster, more expedient manner. However, to the general public, this just looks like, well, we knew letting the fox into the hen house wasn't a good idea, and look what happened. It's bad. I don't like this. I can probably sit here and defend either side of the argument, but the fact that we have this argument right now is just so disheartening. Sports leagues need to do better. There's a lot of people out there that have a lot of different solutions, from we need to ban the promotion of sports betting and the advertising. We need to disassociate the leagues and the sports books. What it really comes down to is we just need to be smarter about this in many different ways, and that'll help with the public perception. So hopefully these things get resolved, we find out the truth, and there are actions taken from this that we can do better next time.
And you hit the nail on the head with the fact that people are going to point the finger in the wrong direction, because the reality is legalized sports betting operators, your actual sports books that are taking money on this. You look at everything that's happened from the Temple situation a couple of weeks ago to all of this now. The Ohtani story, isolated, different example, but the rest of them, it is the operators who are the ones to say, hey, there's something weird going on here. This isn't a regular betting pattern. They're the ones that raise the alarm. When betting goes underground, when betting is criminalized, you don't get that. You don't get that same beacon that can say, hey, hang on a second, something's going on here. And people are going to point the finger in the wrong direction there. But it is, I feel like it's very incumbent on the leagues to pressure people, because I don't think that it has to, I don't think it really matters if they're promoting, go sign up for an account with bet whatever. It's not like that. Those aren't the people that are going to respond to those advertisements and things like that aren't the people that are going to be trying to fix a game. That's just the reality of that. Like, I feel like it's trying to tackle the wrong problem. Are there a whole host of other problems there that we can talk about? Yeah, absolutely. But when it comes to this, when it comes to the integrity of the games and things like this, legalized sports betting just isn't the problem here.
Tom, I totally agree. Legalized sports betting isn't the problem, but we're still going to be in the line of fire when it comes to the public perception, the court of public opinion on all of this. I just don't like it at all.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's not great. It's not something that we want to be dealing with, but hopefully it all gets resolved soon and we can go move on to focus on much more fun things like the start of baseball season, which is what we're going to be talking about today with our fantastic guest, Jessica Brand. I'm excited for this interview. You want to talk about someone who knows what they're talking about. And one of the great things is her background working for league networks. It it really does help because I feel like so often it is very difficult to bridge the gap between someone who is of an analytical mind, who is able to talk about these very, very deep concepts in sports betting and sports analytics, but also make them very understandable and very digestible for the public. And she does that so well.
Yeah, and Jessica doesn't do a lot of podcasts or media appearances, so I'm really kind of interested to talk to her and find out how she got here. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's get to it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on into the show. At long last, finally bringing you on here, MLB expert Jessica Brand. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like you and I have been talking about you coming on the show for months, but baseball season is finally here. Very excited to sit down with you today.
Thanks for having me. As you said, baseball season's finally here, which means I can finally appear. It's like the groundhog getting a chance to finally see his shadow. Except this time it doesn't mean more weeks of winter.
So you're not really a frequent podcast guest when it comes to some of these appearances. So again, really, thank you so much for coming on. But why don't you give the audience a little bit of background about how you got into sports analytics and sports betting? Because you've had a very interesting career.
No, thanks. So the first thing you should know about me is my father's background, and he was the one who got me into sports because I saw a game when I was growing up. I wasn't really into it before then. But the thing is with that is that with my father, he was a statistician, he was a stats guy, and he used to work for he did consulting work for Netflix and Yum Brands, which is like your KFC, your Taco Bell, all that stuff like that. And he introduced me to sports. So that got me into it from that angle. And for me, I was interested in things like game shows and arcades, which sounds weird, but there are plus EV angles to be had there. So I worked that into eventually incorporating statistics that way. And it made sense because I was really interested in the statistical value, like, your fan graphs, your baseball prospectus, your baseball reference, all those types of things. But I realized that, why don't I do something that makes it, efficient for money? So I studied finance. I have that background. I made that one of my majors along with French. So I did a little bit of hedge fund work, a little bit of options work, funding arbitrage opportunities. Sounds familiar. And then I found the parallels that way because someone ultimately challenged me one day and said, "Hey, I bet you could beat the NFL market." They didn't know much about it, but small sample size, and NFL is very tough to beat. But in the small sample size, I realized I could do it within that span. Probably wasn't the best model as my first attempt at doing it, even though it was successful. But the thought was, I realized, hey, I can make this work actually. And it just made sense.
Now, you've also worked here for a couple different actual sports leagues, the NHL and Major League Baseball. When you were at the NHL Network, it was regarded as a league that was lacking in analytics compared to the other major sports. What kind of progress have you seen there in hockey, and did you influence any of those changes?
Yeah, so I would say hockey is a big part of really what's been changing there lately and really for the better. So this year the NHL introduced Edge, which is I think it's equivalent to Baseball Savant, which is owned by the league and it's publicly available. But on a more private side, Mike Kelly and what he's done with Sport Logic, that's sport logged with an IQ at the end, absolutely incredible. It's not really public, but really what they track is revolutionary to the sport. As a researcher, because that was my job there, I can go into more detail if you'd like. I only repeated trends and what was going on to a lot of media analysts, but because of my statistics background, I would love to go into the deep dives and provide that information that way, right? So my influence was making sure that we had advanced stats available because I want to respect the audience really at the end of the day at all times as to what was going on, right? So, you can have your basic information for the audience and, it's media, right? So some level, you do have to keep it simple. But, why not introduce something, and offer it to the audience that's willing to learn something or maybe even willing to incorporate something if they're modeling.
So after the NHL Network, you moved on to MLB Network. And were similar tasks there, or did you? It seems like you have a definite love for baseball. So were you able to kind of dive deeper into your love for baseball while at MLB?
Yeah, so the great thing is those buildings, they're about 5 minutes from where I live. So that's why I live out
Oh,
here in Jersey these days. So they hired me off of Twitter. That's a fun story how I didn't apply for it at all. They found me through my work. So you never know you never know who you're going to connect with. But baseball, I was able to work a little bit more on it because I was able to work on a betting show. Yeah, you can say stereotypes about what sometimes the media betting shows are, but I would give sharp angles. I would be talking about actual line movement. I'd be talking about correlations and so forth, and that would be more specific because I got to work with the people who really the betting analysts. Whereas, the NHL on the betting side was very limited in what they wanted to promote. Like they would have like a guest host say that they like someone to score a goal. Baseball had its own betting shows, which is where I really shine and really I think I made my name and my reputation really across the building that I knew how to sports bet and I knew how to win. Now, obviously, that's oversimplifying it, but for the sake of, reputation, it makes sense. And I was able to really build upon what was really just a show that was based upon trends like Three and His Last Four or whatever, which is really rudimentary vanilla analysis, into line analysis and going into deep depths. Now, obviously, it didn't have to be that deep depths because again, media. But as I was able to shine and show really what was different, like showing upon models, like some of the angles that I look at, like wall heights is one of my favorites. I can again go into that, but wall heights and batted ball profile relative to individual players, if you're willing to go the prop route, or really how it might hamper something else. Like I have a bunch of different angles and correlations that I always forget how well known they are or not. But I figure to the audience, they probably don't know them. So it was very different for me for baseball. The similarity to both, aside from the location that I worked, was writing something called a research packet where on a given day, baseball was usually one, hockey was up to four, but 1 to 4 different game previews detailing all the stats and trends and all that type of information. If I did the Golden Knights game, I'd sometimes include like a Vegas line. I know it's not Vegas, but like I would add that kind of flair because again, it's media. You have to keep it on that note.
You mentioned they saw your work on Twitter and sent you a job offer. The only thing I ever get from Twitter is cease and desist orders. So kudos to you for getting a positive out of Twitter. All right, so Jessica, the more you talk, the more I see that you have like this analytical background, this statistics, but I guess we could call it applied statistics, where you apply it to different markets. So is that what led to this bridge to sports betting? In other words, you had this analytical background in a love for baseball, and you said, "How can I apply this to sports betting?" Is that the bridge here?
Yeah, pretty much. So applied statistics is really what I try to live my life by. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but it's true. If there's a market out there or in anything, that's why I mentioned the arcades and game shows or really anything or sports betting. If there's anything that I realize that you can win, that you can take advantage of, or you can even help people with, I'd like to do that because, people deserve a good world, I think. But if you can do that and you can apply it to a different market, I'd like to apply that and I'd like to find out how to win with it. And I think you hit it exactly correct by saying that.
Yeah. So, okay, let's dive a little bit into applied statistics for baseball.
Mhm.
I now, Jessica, for years, I was a bottom up better in baseball. I had various models. I've talked about some of them in the past. The other ones I haven't talked about. But one of I guess, the key statistic that I always use when trying to compare players is WRC plus, which is weighted runs created. And then the plus signifies that everyone's on a scale where the average player is 100. I'm just explaining this to the audience. I know you already know this, but I'm curious your thoughts on what metrics in baseball are the most signal bearing for bettors to kind of key off of.
One thing I like to look at, and you mentioned the way to run traded plus, I think that's very useful. One thing I would like to start off by mentioning this thing is don't necessarily use StatCast. That is a descriptive stat, which means you should only use it to look back and not really going forward. Although one thing I like to look at, as I mentioned, is wall height, and I like to look at really where a team has been in terms of where the batted ball profile lies, which I think is important. And I like to use that as a cumulative effect. I think it's important to have top down, where you use the source of truth, use the bottom up and build a model where you can look at batted ball profiles. You can look at those relative to the ballpark because you can sometimes see where a team is building a team specifically for their ballpark or they're not. And then the rare angle I like to use that no one really mentions, and you should almost never use it, but it can apply, is what I call the middle ground. So this one requires you to watch the games. Now, I'm not saying you should do this all the time because watching games is dangerous, can lead to recency bias, can lead you to preconceived notions. But if you're me, you've trained your eye to look for certain things. And this is, I think it's a better edge in football, to a lesser extent basketball. But if you've noticed things that are atypical on the mound, and this is kind of a metric in and of itself. There was a game in 2019, the ALDS of Houston against Tyler Glasnow, lost only 2.5 innings, 2.2 innings that game. He was tipping his pitches, and if you realize that, then Tampa's not going to stop hitting him. So, excuse me, Houston's not going to stop hitting him. And there's an edge to be had in that if you recognize the pitches, so are the batters, basically, in real time. And the metrics I like to look at really, I would say, are like RE24, which considers the base out stats of everything that's going on. So you can have 0, 1, 2 outs, and then anywhere between bases empty to bases loaded. And I like to see what's an opportunity there because a lot of our basics, I like to say basic in this case because it's not really necessarily in depth as like we would use in a model, but a lot of them just weight bases empty versus bases on in those situations is equal. And that's not necessarily going to be the case if we're looking at something like a player prop market. And then I like to look at wind and how that impacts each given direction. And once that bottoms that up for me, I don't necessarily trust all their stuff. I really don't trust their prop stuff, but what they do for ballparks and how it impacts each individual ballpark with its angular direction, which I know Jack has talked about a few times on podcasts, is called Ballpark Pal. They used to be free. It's $10 a month now. But for what you get from that, I think that's really worth it in just incorporating some of what their data says going forward. Not necessarily literally what they say, but what they're telling you about wind directions and ballpark orientations. It's unrivaled. I think it's under discussed, and they do a very, very good job with it.
Yeah, I like that. One follow-up question to that. Do you feel that baseball is solved? Like, and let me explain that to the audience as well as to you. There's a general notion of like poker has been, enough hands of poker have been played that poker is relatively solved. But definitely limit poker, but also to some extent no limit poker. And so the game theory optimal play is always known. Baseball is one of those sports where we've played it a lot of times. And since it's state-based, you mentioned 24 different states of play, like it tends to be, we've seen everything play out before. We know the probabilities, right? Does that lead to baseball being solved?
Yeah, I think baseball is solved to a lesser extent than poker, because as you mentioned, the game size, but also the season size, and that goes in two different directions. You have 162 games, which is nearly double basketball or hockey, and then you have the season count. So I think it is solved in the sense that, as you mentioned, we have the one-on-one individual level of batter versus pitcher, which really helps with extrapolating, okay, what does he do against like a given sinker or something like that? That's something I like to look at too for metrics. What individual batters do against pitch types or what teams do against pitch types in general. Because I always say the best mix of metrics that you can have are scouting metrics and really individual metrics that kind of are more macro. So that way you're getting the micro and the macro. But yeah, it's solved like that because we have all these different data points. We have something like Baseball Savant. We have all these metrics that allow us to compare historically. But it's more solved than other sports, right? Because we mentioned hockey. Like, as great a sport logic is, it's only been new in the past 2-3 years. Basketball has second court vision. NFL has next gen. It's certainly more solved than football or American football, I think, because American football not only has the variance of within each position's uniqueness, like what a guard's going to do is not necessarily what a tackle is going to be doing in, say, a pin pull motion. But, I mean, and then football has its own different formations. Baseball, no matter what, is going to be batter versus pitcher. Now, what they can do obviously varies depending on the batter or the pitcher, but we certainly have enough historical comparables for each one that it makes sense that we can compare them like that. And you even mentioned that we have the 1v1 nature. And consider also that ballpark walls, again, back to ballpark walls, ballpark features and weather factors that we go back on. And you look at like humidity factors and we look at what happens when such and such is like that. We have such a broad sample of games because weather itself, obviously there are exceptions, that's data for you, but they're it's basically pretty uniform within a given time period of what an April afternoon is going to look like in Colorado. We know what we expect that to look like, not only from historical data of weather, but also, forecasts. The weather forecasts are getting really, really good beyond the scope of baseball. And I think we can use those to really start to look forward if we attack markets early.
What would you say is one insight that MLB bettors often overlook?
So I mentioned Colorado, Rockies on the road and the inability to hit breaking balls. That's one that I think is really interesting. So if you're facing the Rockies as a home team, and they always say, oh, the home team winning correlates with under, which of course it does. But I think that really especially applies if you're playing Colorado, not just because the Rockies aren't the greatest team, but because of the nature of how Coors Field affects them. Think about it like if you're a Rockies player, 81 games out of the year, you're facing breaking balls just because of the nature and elevation of Coors Field. They're going to have less movement, but now you're having to move off of breaking balls that, are maybe a normative rate relative to the pitcher's usage, maybe even more, but they're having even more movement. You have no time to really adjust to that. And it goes back to like a reverse of a basketball adage that I look at, which is looking for a team off a first game of a road trip. On the Rockies, it's the first game of a road trip because they have less time to adjust to the breaking balls and they're not getting used to them that way. That's a consistent market beating angle that I don't see go up really a lot in markets. It's a wonderful trend.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
I
going
have
to go
some
away now,
friends.
but
I have some friends that are cringing that you had even brought that up because that's something that bettors have been hitting for many years. It's yeah, the first game on a road trip and also the first game back home after a long road trip, and it seems to have more of an effect the longer that homestand was or the longer that road trip was. So yeah, no, that's a great angle.
thanks. Yeah, I use it a lot for basketball. Like basketball is one of my favorite ones. I don't talk about a whole lot, but I love doing basketball betting when it's not baseball season. So, but
Um,
thank you, Jack.
I mean, hey, you're giving out some fantastic signal on the show. That is what we love to have. But let's talk about this upcoming season for baseball here. Like, let's actually talk about some teams and some things that are going to be going on here. Like, starting with that most basic question. Obviously, the Dodgers are assembling a super team. Certain things going on right now, notwithstanding. But I they're certainly feeling like they're predestined to losing the NLDS to a team with 85 wins and the power of friendship. Who are some of the teams that you're liking this year other than the super team in LA?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you have your Atlanta, you have your LA, probably the Yankees have come up a lot, these types of teams. So I'm doing research on this, and one team that really came to mind is Toronto, and it's not they really had an exceptional offseason, right? Because their big news was, oh, Ohtani's coming here, and then he actually didn't, and then they didn't do much. The thing is, though, the Jays don't have to be much. You have a great core with Bichette, who I think is going to have another really strong year. You have Vlad, who's probably going to have a better year than he did last year. Kevin Gossman has had over a 330, basically a 320 plus batting average balls in play. That's BABIP, so balls in contact, less home runs that aren't strikeouts. I mean, this guy's a bona fide ace. He doesn't get in that discussion a whole lot. And since 2021, they've averaged about 90.7 wins per season. Only 6 teams in baseball have averaged more than that since then. I know you can't go off of the last few years, but the point is they don't need to be outstanding in their off seasons to have such a really solid floor to make the playoffs. And if you even see even a little bit of a breakout for them, you could easily see them surpass the Yankees in production for the AL East this year.
Who are some of the teams that you talk about teams that haven't had to do much this offseason? What about the teams that have done a lot this offseason to improve? Like the Giants all of a sudden seem kind of frisky. It feels like they backed their way into that.
Yeah, absolutely. The Giants have been very fortunate. This is an all-in year for them, so you're probably not going to expect as much from Matt Chapman as he did in his A's days. I'm not as big on the Blake Snell signing. I like the contract length and everything from that perspective. I don't love it as much from like a 2024 wins perspective necessarily, but the Giants, because I was waiting all the teams based upon their year-over-year moves, they rank fifth for me in terms of expected wins 2024 versus actual wins in 2023. And I think there's a good opportunity for them to clinch one of the later wildcard spots. It's going to be hard to see them surpass a team like the Dodgers naturally, but you could easily see them in that Padres range. I have definitely in that Arizona range, definitely above Colorado's range. But you look at the teams right now, I think it's very much heavy from like 4 to like 10 in baseball right now. Obviously, the top three are pretty set as to where they are, but that's a team that you could easily see getting a top wild card spot and probably underlooked. I'm a little bit concerned about their ballpark in terms of a guy like Chapman, right? Because Chapman has had some alarming trends with his batted balls. Granted, again, it's history and you're not predictive. But when you look at Oracle, that's just not a comfortable part for where Chapman's going to necessarily hit going forward. And you look at the quote that JD Martinez made, which wasn't actually the smartest one because City's tougher to hit for him. But the fact that hitters are kind of afraid to go there because of the park dimensions, because of how their right field wraps, it's kind of concerning to me in that regard. But I'm not too concerned about their rotation. I'm really big on Logan Webb this year. I think they have one of the most underrated rotations that baseball has had, but you have to have a one syllable or last name to pitch for them. So I'm eligible. Jack might be eligible. Sorry, Thomas, you're not. So
how about teams that you think are going to surprise people this year? Like what are some of the teams that the market might be a little low on?
all right, so this one was interesting because I was looking at a few futures markets when I came up with this. The market I think is low on, and I say this relatively speaking, the market I think is relatively low on Oakland. Now, that's not to say Oakland is going to be great. I'm not going to say they're going to be the money boys. They just need to not lose 105 games this year. And the biggest thing to me for the angle for that is stability, right? You have JP Sears, you have Mason Miller, you have Shea Langoliers probably getting another chance to break out. Zach Geloff, Brent Rooker, these guys are going to get consistent at bats, and you don't have to wait for them to break out as they did last year. Yes, most of them are all bat, but again, these guys were just throwing a lot against the wall last year and see what stuck. But the funny thing is, really, in the second half, they weren't that bad. I'm not saying they were good, but relative to what their win projections are saying, pretty good, right? So I just need consistency from them and the consistency of what we expect their floor to be. I think people are looking too much at the first half of last year when they weren't really looking at, what they could get. I mean, Brent Rooker really didn't do his thing until May. Geloff didn't come up until the summer. These are guys that are instilled in the lineup. Now that you're getting more regularity of your starters and you're not starting a guy like Adrian Martinez every fifth day, you're going to start to get some of those answers as to what you can do going forward, as opposed to finding what's going on, as opposed to like Major League in April.
Jessica, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, the A's, a very interesting team to say the market is low on, but you're right. All they have to do is not be one of the worst teams baseball's ever seen, and all of a sudden, well, I guess the market would be a little bit lower on them than what they could actually do. I mean, it's positive regression to the mean, right?
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that angle actually. There's
Yeah.
there's sometimes finding the team that's not going to suck as much as everybody else thinks they're going to suck is the place to place your bets. Jessica, this was great. A lot of, as the kids say, alpha that has been shared in this episode. We appreciate it. Hope to have you back again on a future episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jack. I'm sorry to be a bother for your time, but this was truly, and I mean a dream come true. Unabated has made so many things possible for me for professionally, and really not only my own enjoyment, but ability to understand things. You've done such a great service, and I feel honored to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much for those kind words. And Jessica, believe me, you are not a bother for our time. We appreciate you taking the time to be on the show with us here today. Of course, if people want to find you in the fantastic work you're doing, where should they go?
Just find me on Twitter or X, whichever you prefer, at Jessica D Brand. It's my name. I literally answer every question that you go on about baseball history. I don't talk too much about bet stuff because of my professional work and my side stuff. I don't want to give up every single angle, but I try to give some detailed information that, maybe you never know how it could be used, but I love my history. Any sport, really. As I said, I love baseball, but I'll answer any sport you've got.
Well, I mean, you certainly are the expert in such a range of fields here. We've been able to cover so much today. And like Jack said, we've given out a whole lot of alpha. Thank you so much for being on with us here. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Of course, if you're listening to this in the lead up to baseball season, which I hope you are right now, you can head to unabated.com. Take advantage of our Jack. This is the best sale I've seen us have in a very long time here. $11.90 for the year. Yeah. This is the lowest our annual price gets for Unabated. Check that out today. Take advantage of that. It's our MLB opening day offer for you. And of course, if you want a tour of the site, a one-on-one Zoom call, hit the link in the description of this video. Schedule a call. You'll be on with me talking through the Unabated tools. I'm looking forward to seeing hopefully a whole bunch of people. And Hey, thank you so much for listening. You know the drill. Hit us with that 5-star rating and review of the show. It really does help the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend about us. Get them to start listening. If you didn't like us, tell your enemies, trick them into listening instead. But in the meantime, that is going to do it for us. Best of luck on baseball season and the rest of your betting adventures as a whole, because as always, let's cash some tickets. We'll see you next episode, everybody.